Today on Public Research with Daniel Schwartz, researcher Karl of the Institute of Unreality discusses the billionaire-funded neo-reactionary movement and the Nazification of the Gen Z right.
You know, it's so funny. I'm looking at your website. Unreal, living in the post-truth world. Speaking of the devil, there's a tidal wave about 300 feet tall. It's about to hit humanity that's online, and most people have no idea.
There's nothing. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the most interesting things to me as a sociologist and as someone who is just a people observer and has been my entire life. Like, this is something people aren't ready for. That Urkel AI is one of the scariest things anyone's ever seen, and I couldn't parse that if I didn't know. Like, that's something that's it's spot on, and that's a concern as someone who in a past life was a musician and a touring musician. Like, this stuff is going to be amazing for certain things, and absolutely the scariest thing you've ever seen on the other end.
Oh yeah.
And I do have my my worries about that, because we're just not ready. None of us, even those of us who watch it all the time and are academically involved, it's not possible to be able to spot everything. And especially like that deep fake voice stuff, there's nothing you can do.
Do you know the NPR show, by any chance, On Being with Krista Tippett?
So I feel like it's where the sweaty balls skit for SNL came from, right? Like,
exactly. So I took her voice and I just said, today on Being, we talked to Young Thug about his work, and it sounds totally real. And I could put a video on YouTube with her logo, and so the stuff that is gonna happen, people can't even imagine. People are just like, think about the cliche of the crazy X. Just think about the crazy X. They're gonna take the X's voice and put up videos of them saying the N-word. You're hiring this guy, he's saying this. I mean, or people are gonna stir up fake controversies. Look at what this person just said about you. Oh, you don't believe me? Here's the audio of them calling you X.
Absolutely. I mean, the era of the deep fake, right? None of us are ready for this, and we're already seeing it with scam phone calls that are emulating relatives' voices to ask for money. And that's a known thing that's gone on. Where people spoof a cell phone call. That's old tech. But then you add in the fake voice of a child or a niece or a nephew asking for money, and here's the bank account.
Oh yeah, I just got arrested in Amsterdam. Listen, they're going to cut me off the phone. I have to go. You have to wire it right away to this account.
Exactly.
You have to, and then and somebody has Alzheimer's. People were talking about this theoretically like a year or two ago, and now it's happening.
And it's happening pretty broadly, right? Like, this is one of the ones we see, and it's these are just kind of edge of the map uses of this so far, in specific regards to engineering social movements, right? Like, we're going to start to see stuff that is so out of the box that
I already know what's going to happen. I mean,
well,
on BitChute, they have Emma Watson reading Mein Kampf, by the way.
Well, that's the kind of stuff
But they're also going to do like fake Jewish voices saying, yeah, we kill the kids.
There's a lot of there's going to be an influx of stuff that you just don't know whether it is or isn't, if it's some weird hybrid amalgamation of AI and real. I mean, the deep fake stuff is really a threat. But that's one part of a broader effort, right? And like, that broader effort isn't as hypothetical as some of the other stuff that we're seeing with tech, right? And you don't have to have anything as high tech as these voice generators or any of that to really do damage. And on Monday of last week, I put out this article about the new right and kind of their goals. And that's one of the ways the AI generative voice tech is part of a trend within the Silicon Valley new right, and the new movement kind of the new tech billionaire class has a very different view of what society should look like. So we're dealing with people who want to disrupt society at a pretty fundamental understanding of reality level, and that's their own words.
No, so let's just lay out the you. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I'm Karl Folk. I'm from Minneapolis, activist turned nerd and researcher on the far right, and kind of more. I came from the background of searching misinformation and disinformation in Russia, and kind of the creation of Putin and the new Russian state, and their media model and their political model, and the intersection of those. And I moved from there into more, because of Russia's composition, let's say, of far right thinking, specifically around multipolar politics and what we would consider super hard right, alt right kind of thought processes. You get into some of the weirder sides of American new right, fascist, Nazi propaganda and stuff, because it's all pulling from the same well. And so, that turned into where we are now, and more my interest on how the right weaponizes niche cognitive techniques to really game politics, but also our sense of reason and
Can you give an example of that?
of gaming on reason and reason.
Yeah.
Well, look at any of the current right-wing news cycles, right? They look at something like the Hunter Biden story, or other, stories that have been built by their own media machine and influencer machine in the internet world. And it goes back and forth between, corporate media, quote unquote, and their internet sphere, and it's A/B testing certain things, narratives, decisions on how to word things, and it plays back and forth and creates this. I think it's been called the reality distortion field, right? Like that just it's a different world inside that bubble, and for that to exist when it's trying to win the quote culture war, it has to push everything else out of its way. And to do that in a society as large and kind of as robust as our democracy is, as problematic as it is, and as many issues as it has, it can push those things out of the way just by nothing's real. Anything's possible. There's zero ability to find truth, and it doesn't matter what the truth is ultimately in their propaganda vision, because the truth shifts every time they need it to.
Did you
And
notice? Oh, I'm sorry.
no, continue.
Did you notice that when when Bannon and Guo, who's a mystery himself, half of the people say he hates the Chinese government, half of the people say he works for it. Did you see when they did the Hunter Biden dump during the election? It was very clever what they did. They interspersed a photo of Malia, which is real, but it's from years ago, of Malia Obama's credit card with Coke on it, and they put it next to a light-skinned African American girl's the side of her, to imply Hunter Biden was doing Coke, having sex with Malia Obama. It's very clever.
I mean, that's so, a lot of the countering disinfo world talks about truth sandwiches, right? Where you take the truth and sandwich other things around it. The inverse of that is a bullshit sandwich. And that's a great way to package it, right? Like, is to take a real image, a shit story, bring them together, and in the right, the population already knows what that signals, right? So there's a lot of signaling then that comes from that to different groups. And like the unfortunate genius of the Republicans right now is that they've understood that unreality, untruth, unreason is incredibly easy to spread and convince people of, because you don't have to, there is no reason. It's all the story, right? So the story becomes the thing that they're really involved with as the group.
Let me play devil's advocate just for the
Yeah.
viewers' entertainment. Well, what do you mean unreality? I mean, Hunter Biden smokes crack. That's reality.
Absolutely. No. So reality is the thing that story is feeding. It's not necessarily that one thing, right? So like, yeah, Hunter Biden has had problems with drugs. This is a known commodity in politics and has been for a while. It's the larger thing that is then being fed into, right? This thing I already talked about in part, the jump from the internet to their corporate media, right-wing corporate media, whether that's OAN, whether that's Newsmax, whether that's Fox, and then going back to the internet, and then back and forth, and the base user then, right, is the one that's caught in the middle of that. And so it's a constant reinforcement mechanism for them, and that then becomes the truth, right? Like, for the people inside that bubble, that story becomes the truth, and that's the unreality of it, right? The unreality isn't necessarily the stories about Hunter Biden, because he has his substance abuse issues, he has his other issues, but it's the larger machinery that then is feeding, and then that gives it a little bit more credibility, right? Like, that is an honest story.
I mean, I would point to, I think what you're saying is true. The Hunter thing, because like he has admitted to smoking crack and
absolutely, yeah.
That one. But I'll give you a perfect example to bolster your point. Do you remember when Marjorie Taylor Greene was giving like official congressional press conferences, and she just was claiming as a fact that Ukraine was money laundering the FTX money?
Yeah, I mean, any of her claims,
Just as
right?
a fact.
Well, yeah. Right, and she's one of a few that do that a lot, where this is the truth, and there's no alternative, and it's a part of the same thing, right? Like, it in the 2 seconds on the internet news, or on, some thread where someone sees something, that's the thing they see, and that just reinforces the whole story that they've seen.
I mean, if anybody doubts this, and if anybody's saying, "Well, you're just talking about the fringe," it's not it's not Republican senators, surely. Well, I got news for you. Mike Lee just tweeted out an InfoWars article today.
Oh yeah, no, he is on one today. And we're talking about a guy whose account is based Mike Lee, right? So like, anyone who knows what this dude is. And I think it's hard for people, right? Like, they want to point and say, this is one thing, this is one group, this is one element, and it's not, right? Like, it's a large pan-right group that is a hybrid, ideology amongst all of them, that has a bunch of overlapping goals and beliefs. And so, like, a guy like Mike Lee, people want to pin him down and they can't, so it makes it really hard to counter that kind of stuff he puts up online.
So you have a site, or you have an institute. I think this is such a good title, Institute of Unreality, which I think, as we talked about with the deepfakes, is going to become increasingly, this is going to be a word we're going to be using a lot in the future. And you write in this article you put out, America's New Right, Dreams of Electric Sheep, by Karl Folk. You write, no analysis of the American right in Silicon Valley would be complete without at least touching on the PayPal mafia. Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, and Mark Andreessen. And I'll tell you what, Karl, I wonder if you see this. When I go to even small Nazi accounts on Twitter, small ones.
Yep.
I'll tell you what I see. And I'm not going to say 100% of the time, but I'll say, I don't know, 30, 40% of the time. Followed by Mark Andreessen, the conehead. The billionaire conehead. And it's just it's the weirdest thing. There's been so many negative articles about Peter Thiel. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So many. Mark Andreessen, is he richer than Peter Thiel? The guy is openly following Holocaust deniers, E. Michael Jones on Twitter. I mean, and then he's talking about accelerationism. And yet, I would estimate maybe 1% of the negative articles that Thiel gets. I don't understand why nobody. Are people just scared of this guy, this Conan?
Well, I think he's flown under the radar in a pretty significant way, in probably the same way that Musk has, where there are a lot of pretty solid alleged incidents of him buying off good press, right? And that's Musk. And I think that you look at that and you've got to assume some of these other guys who are in the same position monetarily or nearly, who have a similar new right belief and neo-reactionary belief that, that excel. I mean, these guys are all Nick Land, Dark Enlightenment, Nick Bostrom guys who are true hardcore neo-reactionaries. One of the first things I read years ago, coming from the misinformation in Russia side, was about the neo-reactionary monarchist movement here and their ties to that deep, the esoteric side of Russian fascism, right? And so these guys are all kind of in the same nest of Evola stew. And it's deeply, I mean, these guys are Andreessen, these guys are accelerationists in the term, like the Nick Land, Nick Bostrom sense. These guys are tech accelerationists who see disruption not in the sense of tech disruption, but system disruption. And that's a different whole thing. They want to bring about a whole different world. We're talking something that is, they've described it as capitalism sharpened to a fascist edge. They've said this publicly, like this is a goal of theirs for that neo-reactionary movement that he and others are a part of within the new Silicon Valley movement, and Musk and Andreessen and Richard Sachs. These are all guys who
David Sachs.
Or David Sachs. Did I say Richard? David.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, David Sachs, and these guys, David isn't as openly rough as Mark, but these guys are pretty clear in what their intention, goals, and desires.
I mean, we'll get into that. I mean, we need to, because I'm a nerd on this stuff like you, but I don't even know Nick Land. I've heard the name Nick Land, but
the Dark Enlightenment.
Yeah, we for audience people, we have to explain some of these names. So Julius Evola was this Italian fascist guy. He was in a wheelchair or something. He wrote these books with these titles. Like, by the way, there's nothing wrong with being in a wheelchair at all. It's not about that. But the guy was writing these books called Ride the Tiger, and so it's just ironic.
He's one of those deep esoteric fascists, and I think there's some consensus that people think of, not consensus. There's a lot of thought that would say that he is more fascist than even the Nazi parties were. And this guy is deeply into some stuff that is heavier than a lot of the Nazi ideology we understand, right? Like there's a progression.
Yeah, I try to be careful. I don't call. I mean, I could. I think there's a really strong case you could call Elon Musk an anti-Semite. I don't do it just because, look, I mean, it's just a fact. He posts positive comments on neo-Nazis' tweets, like Keith Woods, the Irish neo-Nazi.
Okay. Absolutely. Well, and he posts stuff that is openly from...
Oh, yeah. He said, George Soros hates humanity. Oh, you can make a totally strong case to call him. The reason with him and even Andreessen that I hesitate slapping that label on is because I know that they're gonna come back with, oh yeah, okay, I'm Mark Andreessen. Yeah, what's the name of my venture capital firm, dumbass? And he's gonna be like, it's Andreessen Horowitz.
Right.
Who's Horowitz? My partner is a Jewish guy. They have a lot of Jewish friends, so I've always assumed the PayPal mafia, those far right guys, they're not Nick Fuentes, Groyper, they're not like throwing up the Nazi salute in public. They're a different type of far right animal.
Well, this
It's
is the
very
new
confusing.
right. Like, I
Yeah.
think this is the American New Right, which I think we can classify as kind of the outgrowth of the collapse of the alt-right in America in the last couple years. And this is much more tech focused, much more post-rationalist, much more techno-fascist, right? Like, this is the long-termers, the terrestrial movement guys, right? So this is a different kind of fascism necessarily than the Nick Fuentes extremely hardcore, troll level open anti-Semitism. I think, one of the pieces that helped me kind of understand all of this better a few years ago when I first started really reading into this specific part of the network within the transnational fascist movement that this is a part of, is a part by Tamir Baran called The French New Right's Quest for Alternative Modernity. And it really outlines a very well articulated understanding of the French New Right, their philosophy that turned into what we understand as kind of the American alt-right. And then I think it also shows a very good roadmap of what the new right is, where it's a combination of some alt-right elements, a lot of them, especially core beliefs, but then also it has this very neo-reactionary element that's more based on the accelerationism out of Nick Land and the dark enlightenment ideals he put forth, 20 years ago now? I mean, a long time ago. So this is, I think this is a good conversation to be having about this. Like,
oh yeah,
it's a huge conversation though too, and that's one of the problems. Like with that article that I put up, that's 2,500 words. It's dense, but it only covers a sliver of the thing that this is. And I kind of phrased it in a way where I'm going to be doing more in-depth pieces that bring more and more to light, because there's a lot here, especially with the Andreessen, Thiel, Musk world that's growing there.
I love that you're doing maps, and I think that's the way to go.
It's the only way my brain works for this.
Yeah.
I can't keep like a sheet of paper like this in my head,
Right,
but I
me
can
too.
take the info from that
Right,
and put it into something that's much more visual for me.
right.
And it's been really interesting seeing how many people really like that, and how useful it is for other researchers even to glance at it and say, oh, this is a connection.
So
Where did this come from? And then you can zoom in, look at it, and really start to understand that, oh, this person funded this person for 25 years, or this person and this person wrote together for a number of years on an obscure blog. Or
once you start putting the billionaires into the mix, you just see the tentacle. I mean, listen, and by the way, of course, like some of these words can be problematic, and tentacles, and, I get it, but literally, like, look at Harlan Crow and how many people the guy is funding.
This is the map, and it's a pretty dense map. I've been working on it for 3 years now. But so if you look at here, so we can look, let's see. I'll go in on Richard Penina here. So he was just outed in the general public, at least, as being, an alt-right, deeply racist, anti-Semitic. Right?
I have a story about him for later, but keep going.
Yeah. I will be very interested to hear this. So if we look here, so he's in turquoise, and the map moves from him, to everything from the Heritage Foundation and the Cato Institute to, the Manhattan Institute, and guys like Mark Andreessen and
Harlan Crow.
Yeah, Harlan Crow, some big names in the right. But then his Center for the Study of Partisanship and Ideology at Austin, that has links again, to even, even more to the Manhattan Institute, even more to things like the Claremont Institute, to Chris Rufo, things like City Journal, which is the Manhattan Institute's publication. But then, one step further, they all have ties to guys like Ron DeSantis, Tom Cotton, the Koch brothers, and it's a very dense web of different groups, foundations, institutions that are tied to colleges and universities, and then these extremely hard right individuals.
Is Inez Stepman in this?
Not yet. These maps are constantly being updated.
That's he, and I don't even know how to say his name. And I don't know how to spell it. Well, he did a podcast with the goofy, that's the nice thing I'll say about Michael Tracy for a while, called Gathering of Experts.
Okay.
But now he and his new podcast is called Clown Car, and he does it with Inez Stepman, who I think she's at some conservative think tank. She's at Independent Women's Forum. They're like the people who go to bat for like Kavanaugh and stuff like that. And she does a podcast now with Hannah. So it comes out that he was writing for all these Nazi websites, and I mean literally Nazi websites.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Two of them. Counter-Currents, Occidental Observer.
Well, and those two, I mean, Occidental is. It's just as hard as it comes.
Oh yeah. And if you look at Counter-Currents, his articles were running next to like books about how awesome Hitler was, and
Counter-Currents is, a Nazi publication.
Oh yeah. And so he was doing it under the pen name Richard Host. So this Christopher Mathias, who's awesome at Huffington Post, through amazing reporting, proves it's him.
Right.
And he does his first podcast with Inez Stepman after this, like a week after or something. And it's funny. There's like been, I'm not sure if anybody else has even reported on this, but I've been trying to get people to cover it. He for 1 second is like, I don't believe that, and yeah, I'm sorry, this would be bad. 1 second. The rest of the show is just doubling down, tripling down, attacking the people exposed to him. He literally says, both of them say, they do this thing, and I posted it on Twitter, about, they're seeing lots of stuff in the world that gives them hope, and they're talking about, the stuff in the world giving them hope. And for me and you, it would be like, oh, there was a kid volunteering at the soup kitchen, right?
Right.
What gives Richard Hoyenia and Inez Stepman hope? It gives them hope that Paul Gosar hasn't denounced Nazi Nick Fuentes, who he fundraises with.
I think are not that far off from the way that our culture was operating until recently. And I'm wondering if you think that actually is changing, because it seems like Peter, I don't think is blackballed from the right. You, I don't think are going to be blackballed from the right. Nate, I don't think is going to be blackballed from the right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's crazier than that. Nick Fuentes is hanging out with congressmen. I mean, you see, Paul Gosar was speaking at Nick Fuentes' event or something like that. And as far as I know, these congressmen don't denounce him. So I think we really are in a new world. I think the polarization is such that something like Huffington Post has no sort of, credibility to be telling people how they should think about different issues to the right. So yeah.
Right. Well, I mean,
so he's still a Nazi.
Well, these guys were dealing with, and that's the thing. The new right, like I said, is kind of this hybrid ideology, right? So you have it ever shifts in front of the camera, but the core of it is exactly that. It is modern Nazism, right? And super hard fascism and reactionary kind of thinking, all kind of in the same space, and it changes when it needs to. And yet, they're what they're seeing is exactly what you said. They're seeing the light they're seeing is that their ideas are being hyper normalized, are being accepted as things that are going to be okay. The UN is, working with some of these same people to look into long-termism, right? These are extremely problematic trends that they are now directly a part of. And with long-termism, like thinking that out, these are, really kind of dangerous ideas that are now permeating some of the legal bodies that do destine our future in certain parts of the world. And that's concerning, especially what that means for parts of the world that they have pretty explicitly said don't matter. Because at the heart of this is a deeply eugenics idea of the world, eugenicist idea of the world.
I gotta play devil's advocate just for the sake of it. So
Yeah,
is Andreessen a Nazi?
I don't think you could say he's a Nazi outright. I
Okay.
think he is an accelerationist, a tech accelerationist. I think he's a neo-reactionary.
Okay, right.
I think he's deeply invested with a large group of people who have a whole host of beliefs that fit into everything from the Nazi milieu to the extremely hard right libertarian milieu, right? Like I think this is a little bit, it's kind of it's an a la carte far right.
Gotcha.
Right? Like this isn't
take what you want. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very pick what you want far right, but it all has the same goals ultimately.
I want to get into terminology because it can be confusing for people.
Yeah, right. So like, I don't know, the alt-right, like that word, right, to describe what Richard Spencer and these guys were, like Peter Brimlow and all these dudes, that came out of the paleo conservative world and like the hard right libertarian world, right? Like in 2008. And that was, I think that, I don't remember, Talkie magazine, I think.
Talkie's mag, yep.
Yeah. And so like
Talkie, we should tell audience, Talkie is referring to this Greek billionaire playboy guy named Taki Thera. I'm sorry, it's a Greek last name.
Yeah,
Therakopoulos or something.
It's quite hard. Yeah.
Sorry, I cut you off.
No, but so like, and that was a couple years before altright.com. And then like, but those guys, like that was Brimlow. And then, one of their...
Spencer was the editor at Talkie's mag before he made his...
Yep, exactly. And, Paul Gottfried, these guys, those were all over there, but they were doing exactly the thing that has accelerated now within the Silicon Valley movement, which is mixing this Evola fascism, kind of European New Right ideas at the time, just extremely large milieu of extremely fascist and hard right ideologies kind of percolating around, and it's what we're seeing again in this tech movement. It's similar people again. It's all kind of downstream from the alt-right.
See, I know that Teal met with James Kirkpatrick. That's a pen name. What's his real name?
I can't remember his real name, but I know who you're talking about.
And it's interesting. I think distinctions are very important, just to be honest. Like, I saw people like grouping like V-Day or Occidental Observer and Countercurrents, and I sort of cringed. Though it's not like it's not like they're totally distinct. It's not like V-Day is like, oh, they're like the New York Times. No. But I don't know what V-Day is like now, but I know that they were like not openly anti-Semitic for a while. I don't know if they are now.
Well, like the big difference, right, between like the American right and the European right for a long time was the level of anti-Semitism.
Right. And
the American side, for whatever reason in the interwar period, was deeply anti-Semitic, don't get me wrong, and horrifyingly so. But the European right has a very different view of it. And like the alt-right and them weren't explicitly anti-Semitic outwardly.
In the start.
Correct. In the very start. And this is almost 20 years ago, right? So, and like, the alt-right and its white nationalist kind of milieu, right? Like, I don't know. There's just so many parts of it. Like there's so much of the manosphere that's a part of it and what that means about, like patriarchy and how it's working within our current level of understanding. and then that ties with the monarchist and hierarchical views that bleed into neo-reactionary politics, like the ones that we see kind of with the Mark Andreessen and those guys, that crowd.
So this is really interesting because like we are very simpatico, like we both understand like there's something really nasty afoot in this country, and I think we totally agree on that. But you have this set of knowledge about this sphere of neo-reactionaries and Nick Land that I am really ignorant about, and my focus is mostly on like Gen Z, the Fuentes,
Right.
Nazis, and so it's
the new crop of kids.
It's quite interesting. But this term "new right," I guess my problem with this, it hasn't been used like 1,000 times in the past, so it gets like really confusing because like they were talking about a new right in the 80s and the 90s.
Well, I think it's tough, right? Because the new right is a set of ideologies, right, in Europe specifically, and the alt-right, what I really look at was a very specific time span between like 08 and 18, 19, and I think they've morphed into something a little bit more aggressive and a little bit more towards what you see their original views within, like what they draw from the French New Right and Benoit and that. Like they definitely always have had that ideology. It's always been a part of it, but it seems they've kind of again reinvented certain parts of the movement to better reflect some of that thinking. And that's where we get this idea of infrastructure building and alternative building, like building think tanks and all these different things that give credence, and in our society specifically, give an air of expertise on subjects that they may not be a part of.
Okay, so I'm a very specific person. Like that's the way I need to understand.
Absolutely.
Things. So
yeah.
Let me just so I and the audience can better understand the contours here. I'll just name people and you tell. So, are the Groypers part of the new right?
I would consider. I mean, the new right I look at as a pan ideological right wing movement of similarly motivated and groups and individuals that have a similar goal of ending democracy for a white ethno state in different flavors.
Well, let me just put it this way: who on the right would not? It could be a columnist, senator, a congressman. I assume Liz Cheney is not part of the new right.
Absolutely not. I mean, okay. I think there are a number of people who I think live in the right at the edge of the silo that exists online and like in media for it. I think a good example is someone like a Kinzinger, because his age, his military background, all these things, he's existed in the world that the alt-right has kind of built over the last, from 2008 until 18 or 19, right? But for whatever reason, call it patriotism, whatever reason, I don't know what the reason is, and I won't ascribe one to him. He didn't fall into the trap that so many of these people do of the false kind of negative that their reality requires, right? I mean, another good example at like a state level even would be, some of the southern states like Tennessee and whatnot. They have coalitions, strange coalitions growing between Democrats, some liberal, some not as liberal, and more moderate members of the conservative party. I think you see much more of the state level kind of right at the edge of the thing, but not in it. And I think it's because the thing that works at the national level for the MTGs, the Mike Lees, doesn't work necessarily in certain states where there's still some balance in the politics.
So I think I've done a disservice. You've written this really big article you put a lot of work into, So I just want to give you the floor.
Yeah, I wrote this article. It's called The Alt-Right Dreams of Electric Sheep, or the American New Right, excuse me, Dreams of Electric Sheep. And we, for me and a lot of people in the far right, I think there's a growing sense that...
Just to be clear, Karl's not in the far right.
I am not. In fact, I am opposed to all of it in a pretty vehement way. If you've ever
trust me, I can vouch for that.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things. This is, I think, a very important thing, and the American right has laid out kind of its plans both at the Republic. Kind of the joke, for a lot of my late teens and early 20s was, the Republicans have told us what they're going to do. We just have to wait and watch. And it's the same thing with these groups. And they've, there's a whole host of research from Matthew Lyon's wonderful Control Alt Delete, or, the article I talked about earlier from Tamir Bar-On. These are great things that inform that article. And really, we're dealing with a group now that looks like every group it wants to emulate, and even if that means it's a political group. And one of the things the alt-right always, the claim was this button-down fascism, and I think that's fair, but it's also the tech bro fascism. It's also the Fuentes style, super aggressive, trolly internet shows. But right now we're specifically seeing it, and what the article is about is seeing it in Silicon Valley and how it's being manifest through our understanding of technology and the kind of ongoing acceleration towards a future that is entirely anti-social in a pretty fundamental way based on these technologies. And the article really goes more in depth on the heart of what was once the alt-right and what I believe is now the American New Right. And, it shows the merger of Silicon Valley and its new money with this new and extremely unsettling and deeply fascist view of the world and what they are trying to world build. And we're facing something that's different but entirely the same as some of the past iterations of far-right, neo-fascist, and Nazi ideologies. It's utilizing technology at its kind of cutting edge to try and undermine the collective reality of society in a pretty fundamental way, both to forward its own interests, but to devalue the interests of those it sees as a problem that needs to be dominated and gotten rid of. And I think that, those things are starting to come together, not just for researchers who've been seeing this and yelling about it for a long time, years, but also, the general public starting to get wind of some of this, the pronatalism, the long-termism, all these different things. People generally see it and laugh at the absurdity of it, but also fail to understand, there's a whole lot of power and money behind some of this.
I think whether people sign on to 100% of your conception or not, people can quibble with definitions and stuff, right? That's
Absolutely
all fine. But one thing that is absolutely true that you're getting at here is one of the few upsides, I guess you could say. There's way more downsides to Musk, his horrible Twitter ownership. One of the few upsides is that I think slowly this myth that Silicon Valley is just all liberals is dying away, which is, look, I mean, the workers, I guess, like the coders, they might be liberal, okay? But the bosses, some of them are liberal, but as you point out, this PayPal mafia, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, Mark Andreessen, David Sachs, they are very, very far from liberal. Very far.
Absolutely. I mean, they're reactionary in a pretty fundamental way. And they view, we're talking like techno fiefdoms, right? And digital nation states. And it just says a lot about the vision of the world they have, and I think it's important for people to understand, like, when you have, let's say, 1 billion people on your platform and you're worth 50 to $100 billion, you are effectively a nation state.
Oh, 100? You mean you're talking about Musk? So that's over $100 billion.
Absolutely, but you're essentially a digital nation state, right? So, like,
Yeah.
you can do things that we're starting to get at the edges of very weird neo-reactionary and monarchist, hierarchical views of how society should be ordered, how they should be protected because there's a merit system in place, which just isn't true. And Musk, like you said, has shattered that in probably the one in out of 100 billion poor choices, he's made one that really did shatter that illusion that because you're a billionaire, you're brilliant.
I mean, let's be clear. Okay, so we're gonna have to. This is gonna be difficult, but we do have to explain this because if a freak like me doesn't even know this stuff, the people listening to this, a lot of them are gonna be in the dark. So let's talk about. Okay, now it's funny. Neo-reactionary was the NRX.
Yep.
The guy I've heard is what's his name? Mencius.
Moldbug.
Yeah, what's his real name again? Curtis Yarvin. Yeah.
Yep.
And he's got Teal funding, and he's
These are big names in the tech sector.
And then Nick Land, is he a friend of his?
I mean, like Nick Land and Bostrom and all these guys, are philosophers who came, like Land specifically came out of Warwick and the cybernetic research unit there, along with some other guys. And these were rationalists, post-rationalists, kind of in that world as well. And, like they reject egalitarianism in principle. They argue for like genetic differences in ability and intelligence and that kind of stuff.
They like monarchy. One of their
they're monarchists.
Like the Yarvin guy, like he was on this pretty mainstream kind of right wing YouTube show, and I guess the softer side of it that they present to like the normies is like, hey, think about democracy versus monarchy.
Yep.
The president's only there for 4 years, so if he really screws up, but a king, if he's there his whole life, if he really screws up, people are going to chop his head off, so he has to be a better leader. He's more invested. That's sort of the softer stuff, right?
Right. Well, and like with Land, right? Like, and tech acceleration is in part his baby. And his belief really is like to sharpen the edge of capital to a fascist edge. And it goes further than that, which is like pushing global capital to the point where artificial intelligence replaces humans, right? Like it's a transhuman accelerationist idea that he's got. And, like these are the guys that Thiel loves and all of that. So, you've got Yarvin and Isamov. These are all Thiel guys. And they're I mean, it is the anti-enlightenment. Like when they say dark enlightenment, it is going back prior to the French Revolution, prior to all of this, to a monarchist, right-wing, extremely hierarchical, science racism-based feudal society. And, there's just a lot of tie between that and the alt/new right. And, and like Saylor and these guys, like they live in
Saylor.
Steve Saylor. They live in both worlds, right? Like there are a lot of these guys who originally came from straddling the fence and are, that kind of thing. And, I think in some ways it's about breaking taboos and breaking cultural norms as much as it is anything else. And building from that and with guys who are billionaires like Thiel and that. And
but these guys are more respectable than your average groiper yelling like gas.
Well, they're not trolls in the sense of being a Nazi troll like a basic groiper, right? Like a basic groiper is just some kid. And that's a different thing than this. This is much more people who understand appearance is everything, and in some cases, like with Musk, are obsessed with it, and they understand that that's some of the power of their, of the movement, is to keep it behind that kind of veneer. And it's a different looking version of a thing that we've all, for those of us in the right wing research community, have seen time and time again, which is a fascist movement that looks like a bank meeting.
It's so good to talk to you and compare notes, because I'm really ignorant about a lot of these people, and my heuristic, or I guess that's a fancy word, the way I've been thinking mostly about this is generational.
Yeah.
Boomers, millennials, Gen Z, and I think my thing where I'm like, the conventional wisdom isn't getting right is people don't understand how radical the Gen Z right is. They just don't get it.
The Gen Z right are scared.
They're not. I mean,
They're Nazis.
I mean, a good amount of them, not 100%, okay, but it's crazy.
Yeah,
So
there's enough percentage of guys like the campaign staffer in Florida who just got outed for putting up that
Nate Hockman, works in the GOAT,
putting up the running up the hill fast wave video for DeSantis. Like this crew of the online right in Gen Z, they're fascists, right? Like these guys are a different thing than the Republican Party has put on its plate before for its future generations. But it may, one of the things that we've seen coming out of Florida and other places, and you see it in right-wing movements outside of the US, is they become almost self-neutering because of things like that video from Florida and other stuff. If they don't have command of the entire media sphere and the arms of politics at the national level, this stuff alienates people. It's deeply weird. It's deeply unsettling, to quote normies. And for people who have any understanding of history and certain things, it sets off alarm bells. So, it's interesting seeing what's happened to DeSantis because of that embrace for this extremely hardcore online Gen Z fascist energy.
Well, Karl, let's be fair. Nate Hockman told Rod Dreher he had no idea what that symbol was. He thought it was an Aztec symbol. Sir, he was celebrating Latino heritage, and here you are calling him a Nazi. He thought it was an Aztec symbol.
How dare he argue in bad faith for overt Nazi symbology? Whoever would have thought the far right would be extremely well versed in that, especially a bunch of Gen Z super online Chan Nazis.
I just love the idea that he's like admitted listener, fan of Nick Fuentes, and he has no idea what that nonsense is.
Well, and I mean, it's going to be real interesting as more comes out about different states' Republican representatives and their staff, because that seems to be a dead log that just continues to spill rot forth every time someone kicks it. And so it's everywhere in that party, their younger branch, that is far scarier.
Okay, so I've been begging, and by the way, I want to give a shout out to Hunter Walker and Arizona Right Wing Watch.
Hell yeah.
And because they basically broke this story, and Josh Marshall at TPM, because he published the story about, which is, by the way, now, I'm not throwing shade at TPM, but the fact that the New York Times, the Yahoo, or like some bigger outlet did not I wonder if they rejected this story. But anyways, I mean, because it seems like it should be a huge story. We have admitted members of basically a Nazi cult that have literally raised their right hand and taken like a Hitler vow to this Holocaust denier Nick Fuentes, promising to rape, murder, and kill for Nick Fuentes.
Raise your right hand. Repeat after me. I will kill, rape, and die for Nicholas J. Fuentes.
This Wade Searle, so Paul Gosar has a long association with this Hitler lover guy named Nick Fuentes. He has 2 staffers who are still on staff who were exposed, open, they're neo-Nazis. And
Well,
it's also,
Gosar,
yeah,
I think we can comfortably say
yeah,
is a white supremacist.
yeah. His
with-
family told us. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And a white supremacist and a fascist. He definitely staffs Nazis, uses Nazi staffers, neo-Nazi staffers who do have ties to Fuentes and others. And they're huge. I mean, this is one of those bigger unreported stories, I think, in American politics, is that there is a growing number of Republicans who not just believe the thing that they're saying that is white supremacist or worse, but they employ staff that is young, incredibly engaged with politics, but also unapologetically fascist, and that's a serious problem.
Groyper is just a new name for Nazis. It's a new form of Nazism.
I mean, yeah, the Groypers and all of that. I mean, these are all just fascist youth movements with different flavors.
Yeah. And so when that story came out, I literally DM'd all these DC reporters. I begged them. I said, I've got a story for you. It's so easy. Here's what you do.
Yeah.
Wait for this Nazi Gosar staffer, Wade Searle, to go out to lunch on Capitol Hill and just take a picture of the staffers he's going to lunch with. Because I guarantee you this guy knows 20 other or 30 or 50 other fellow secret Groypers that work in Congress. They're all buddies. They all go to lunch together. And lo and behold, we know that's true. We have the great Zach Roberts, who's been on the podcast before. He snapped a photo of Wade Searle and then the Groyper Nazi staffer for MTG waiting on the street in their suit and tie out for lunch. And I told reporters, just take a picture. I'll help you identify them. There is a nest. I have been told, and it's one of those horrifying things, that half of the Gen Z Republican staffers in Congress are basically Groypers, or are basically Nazi cult.
I don't have any numbers on it, but just looking at the amount of people that we know at the congressional level have deep ties to these groups, it doesn't shock me. I think that's the scariest part for me, is it just doesn't shock me. But these are the stories that journalists have to start to jump into more readily, and larger news outlets have to be more comfortable with, because these are stories that are important for a lot of reasons, and are stories that really capture something fundamental about our country that we have to understand to move forward and move out of this phase of backslide. And that's the hardest part, right? Historically, this is one of those subjects that doesn't make it super far.
It hasn't been very telling how the right has been reacting to these people being exposed as like anti-Semites and racists, like the Hockman, the Pedro Gonzalez, the Richard Hanania. The amount of, it's like a Mexican standoff. It's like, I better not say anything because I got my own stuff in the group chat. Like, well, they have to go. They're really passionate that these guys they gotta have jobs. They gotta get paid. They're so invested because they're part of it.
Well, right. I mean, it's co-conspirators, right? Like, at the end of the day, these are all people who have a vested interest in not letting things get out because there's more that they haven't publicly put out. And, there's this kind of gentleman's agreement level of covering backs is really the thing that we have to break if we want these stories to get out, and they need to get out.
Let's just talk about this stupid 2024 race. It's already over. We thought maybe we were going to get something, but right. I mean, this is over, right? It's Trump.
I mean, Trump's going to be the Republican candidate, right? Like, barring some bizarre, truly world-shaping event, I think we all see Trump probably being the front runner for the Republicans. And that's going to mean even if he's possibly in custody, I mean, there's just a whole lot here where we're going to see some strange stuff regardless. We don't know what these trials look like. We don't know what the outcomes are going to be, but it does appear he's going to be the Republican candidate. And, I think talking with friends I have who monitor misinformation and disinformation, some of the stuff, news stories that have come out about like Elon's fake followers, there are a whole bunch of shenanigans sitting in the wings for the lead up to 2024. And, the Republicans, there's very much like if they lose, this is done for at least a generation for them. They're not going to have access to, you can't maintain this level of right wing, quote, populist fervor indefinitely. You just can't without someone in office. So, I think there's going to be a whole lot more that we haven't seen yet that's going to come from these people, because this also, I think, for the wealth class is being seen as a referendum on some other things. Control who and what, where the future is going to go. And, there's probably some fear looking at it from a more critical perspective. I think there's some fear by the white wealth class specifically, that like between climate change, the political and generational shift that's taking place, they see it as this is our shot. If we don't win it, this is going to be bad for us. Increasingly, that's the feeling I get. So, no holds barred, I think, is the words I would use to describe 2024. And I would preface that by saying that 2016, in my view, was a practice run for this one.
Well, at least we know that Twitter is going to be a really responsible stakeholder, and they're going to be the 10 people on their content moderation team are really going to be putting in that. I'm kidding.
Well, yeah, it's going to go super well. I'm sure Elon will unveil some super brilliant AI that works perfectly with zero problems.
What did Linda, the quote unquote CEO of Twitter, say the other day? She said he was so hilarious. She said there's been a 99% or was it 90% drop in hate speech.
Bullshit, I believe, is the technical term for that is bullshit.
They literally have given like the Nazi editor of Stormfront a blue check.
Oh yeah, I mean, Anglin is literally on Twitter with a check mark.
It's all part of fucking hate speech. But well, here's what's scaring me, man. Biden, look, I'm gonna vote for Biden, but he does look like, I saw this meeting he had with Herzog, the president of Israel, and he was just sitting there like, it was a good, we met, and that is scary to me, especially because Trump has not really aged.
Trump has his reality distortion feels crazy. Biden, I don't like Biden. I don't like his politics, but like we're in deep shit here. The other option's bad. The big problem is that I see with something like that meeting. I mean, it just outlines how we gotta the gerontocracy of our government is part of the issue here, and it's part of what's being exploited against democracy and freedom, ironically. And like, Biden, unfortunately, he may be the only person that can beat Trump.
Right. Well,
and that bothers me.
But I wasn't asking about Biden. I think we all know like the deal with Biden. He's the guy we got and whatever. Yep. Nobody's okay. But can Trump win? Because I am not. I really think he can.
I can't count anything out. Like,
what percent would you put?
Trump's, I can't give you a percentage, but he has a shot, right? Like, that's the part that should scare people, is he's got a pretty decent shot of getting to a place in these elections where even if he doesn't win, he can cause enough chaos that 2020 was was one thing, but if he knows that he goes to prison if he loses, and it's even remotely close, they're going to go to the Electoral College. They're going to go to a Supreme Court. They're going to throw everything they can at this to tilt it towards Trump. And that gives him a shot, a pretty solid one. And, people want to make some high and mighty argument that these legal proceedings are somehow going to shut him down. And I have my hopes and dreams that
Georgia will definitely not happen before the election. New York is really not. It's all the only one is this Jack Smith one.
Well, and the Jack Smith case is an interesting case. Has some serious ramifications. So even that one going through is going to start to do stuff. But, there's a real chance that we get to the election and it's close by appearance. Whether or not it is on the ground, is hard to know. And it looks a lot like 2020. And if that's the case and Trump still loses again, I think all bets are off. I think too, if he really plays up the cards that he's been playing that are absolutely networked and stochastic violence, and he continues targeting people, this is going to get very out of hand in pretty quick fashion, but in a very different way than the out of hand of January 6th. I don't think we see another organized effort like that from anything I've seen, read, heard. We don't see something that organized and big.
I feel like we just scratched the surface in a way. Like we need to. I have so many questions for you.
No, I think that's absolutely fair. It's one of the things that I've really run into with all of this. I put up another article, yesterday? Yeah, yesterday.
I'm looking at it right now.
And, I had originally written like 1,500 words. I was like, okay, this is great. This is a nice little primer. And then I did my first edit, and it was 2,000 words. And then I did a second edit, and it was about 2,500 words. And, it's going to be, all of this is such a massive, decades-long set of kind of interlocked movements and issues, and there's a whole system now that's being built, and that's a lot harder to explain than one member or one aspect. And the real hard part is a lot of this is a feeling more than anything, and that's a hard thing to explain.
Do you want to start? I was just looking at your new article. Do you want to start there?
Yeah, we could talk about that. Absolutely.
So you wrote this new article on your site called AstroTurf Nation.
Yep.
What's it about?
So it's actually kind of, it's a little bit in the world we were talking about last time, but it's also it's really kind of starting to get into the nitty gritty of the American New Right, their view of what's going on in the moment, and who's leading it, and kind of some of the analysis around that. And I opened the article by saying that the American New Right is a pan-right syncretic movement that acts as a franchise for like the larger international New Right and the global movement around that. And I mean, that's really how this all started, right? I was watching and reading as much as I could about the building of the Putin state in Russia, let's say. And I did a lot of research around that. And, I think we covered some of that, but that's what this has turned into, is this similar pan-right appeal. And the AstroTurf, the alt-right in years past really understood the power of the AstroTurf and the power of the feeling, again, that they were inevitable, or that they had these huge numbers, and that they had, the ability to crash all these polls, when in reality they were review bombing or, poll farming, to give that appearance. And the political environment has adopted that on the Republican side in such a major way that, like, I kind of felt we had to jump into that. And so I started writing, and ended up with about 2,500 words on why that specific vector of the American New Right and their disinformation franchise is extremely dangerous.
The graphic design for the article has a picture of Chris Rufo. Why'd you pick him?
Well, so he, Rufo kind of he touches a few of the bases that I really would consider to be a constellation that appears a ton in the American New Right. And that constellation is this, so first you have his, I go over late in the article, kind of his life and his work at the Manhattan Institute and being a domestic policy fellow at the Heritage Foundation, research fellow at the Discovery Institute, which is like a creationist, let's say, institution that pushes some extremely hard right views that oppose the theory of evolution in favor of intelligent design and some other stuff. He also, I mean, he's worked for the Claremont Institute as a senior fellow. I mean, he's kind of the face of this, and he moved from a right-wing thinker with the largest air quotes around that I can muster, that turned from that into a culture warrior and lit the fires of the anti-CRT movement. And now he's moved into the position that he, I think, has the most damage ability from, which is leading Ron DeSantis's anti-enlightenment war against higher education and public education in general in Florida. So I chose him because he's kind of the, he's the face that people, even outside of the terribly brain-wormed, community I'm a part of, it would probably recognize. And that's still a niche part of the Republican Party. But it's definitely growing. And, for me, he's kind of one of the faces that I think really embodies the danger of this entire new right and the infrastructure they're building.
One question I think it's always good to ask uncomfortable questions of challenge yourself.
Yeah.
One question I think I'm gonna start asking guests is, where do you draw your lines, right? So John Kennedy, the Louisiana senator, okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't agree with him. I don't like him, but he's not unacceptable. Like, so where do you draw your line on the right? So like people you don't, I'm not saying you agree with them, but who do you put on that edge? Like, so Rufo, you say is unacceptable. Are there any right-wing media figures that you're okay with?
I mean, at this point, it's their information ecosystem is so contaminated with everything from standard conspiracy theory to the worst kind of anti-Semitic and racist conspiracy theories. It's hard, my line is probably before that, right? So like for me, it's hard because the Trump legacy in part is tearing open this hole in the kind of the corpse of the body politic and letting all of this just rot fall out. And at this point it's hard to say you can, let's say John Kennedy's actually an interesting choice, right? Like, he's a Republican. I think a lot of the new crop of the Republican Party, doesn't even notice him in certain ways. I don't know right now if you can be in the Republican Party after what's happened since 2020 and 2021, in my mind, and still be taken in good faith.
So, but okay, Mitt Romney, Susan Collins, they're acceptable, right?
I mean, they're both liars, so I don't know. But for me, that's the thing. Like, if we need honesty, right? Like, to counter the thing that Trump has done to politics and to just our social understanding of truth, we're going to need people who are, quote, good Republicans. And I don't know if that exists anymore. like the good Republicans are going to have to be the ones that say this is the worst thing possible, right? And this is dangerous and it's unacceptable. And we've said this now, I've probably said this now for 8 years, right? Like that's the thing it's going to take. I just don't think we're going to see it. I think the Republican Party as we know it, previous to 2010, is dead.
Yeah.
I think I think that's a story that, any belief that we're coming back to rationality from these people.
Yeah.
I don't think that's happening. So I think, it's hard right now to see who you could say, this is acceptable.
Well,
it's one of those guilt by association things for me, right? Like, we're right at the edge of some very heavy stuff to be a part of.
I'm trying to imagine what a healthy right would look like, and I don't know what it would be. And I'm wondering, have you thought about that at all?
I mean, I'm 36, right? I've never in my life seen a healthy Republican Party. So I don't know. Like when I was in my, by the time I was 10, the country was dealing with Newt Gingrich and the full frontal, beginning of this, in the way that we understand now. And so I don't know, I don't know what a truly healthy Republican Party or conservative movement would look like. Because if we look further back at historical examples, we get people who sound so much further left than the Republican Party has been since before I was alive that I don't know what people would do. It's one of those ones where it's just, we don't have a frame of reference for that if we're less than 50.
I sometimes I look at Canada and I think, well, maybe that, because it's like I think to myself, there's always going to be people who are more conservative, right? And people who are more liberal. And so
that's the balance, right? Like that's the balance of democracy, is figuring out, we all have to have that the conversation that your question begs, right? Like if we want that party to survive and not become a modern version of the Whigs, which is how I actually see the Republican Party right now. If we don't want that outcome, I don't know how we rein this back in the current environment, and when the current monetary feedback seems to feed this just populist outrage and conspiracy theory. And, that's throughout a lot of the conservative movements worldwide now. That's the bigger issue, right? Like this is conservatism inherently seems to have been not able to withstand the full might of digital modernity. So it had to figure out, a way to deal with that, which is to weaponize it against modernity.
Yeah,
right? That's one of the hardest parts about this movement, right? Like, and about this ideology is like, it's just weaponizing high tech against everything, including itself.
It was so clear to me in like 2015, even before Trump, that what passed as conservatism, whatever, was really just a total paper tiger.
Absolutely.
The base had no interest in like cutting, the taxes, and it was really they had left this huge void for Trump, and it's embarrassing because I was so ignorant. But I thought maybe I didn't think Trump would be good at all. But back in the beginning, I thought, maybe a more populist Republican Party that is more skeptical of free trade and doesn't want to cut Social Security. Yeah, it's okay. And then it became the worst nightmare that everybody predicted. All the predictions about him unleashing Pandora's box as far as hatred, it all came true. To the point where I now view Trump as and I wonder what you think. I view him now as almost a moderate in his movement.
Well, I think Trump, we don't know. I mean, Trump's a figurehead in a lot of ways. So he's an empty vessel, right? We don't actually know what Trump thinks on anything because he says 7 different things. And that's, I think, the danger of Trump, right? In certain ways, is that it allows people to make assumptions. And, we don't know what Trump's heart is. Everything I've seen would say he is rapidly radicalizing along with others in the party towards something that, like, this country has no conception of. He was already an authoritarian right-wing white supremacist, right? Like, that was clear. But he was an incompetent fascist. And now, it sure appears that from what he said and how they are orchestrating the media coverage, I mean, they're pulling out all the stops on him not being an incompetent fascist, or he's hired more competent fascists behind him. I think there's a misunderstanding now that's similar to 2016 in that people assume there are going to be guardrails from some of the institutional stuff like the courts right now. And that is I hope those guardrails work to preclude him from taking office. But with a guy like Trump and a movement like the one he's built and that is assembled around him, he's going to be a very scary guy here for a minute, in a way that he just couldn't be even with the full might of the White House. And he was horrifying as president. So I have some real fear that we're going to find out exactly who Trump is in short order, actually.
Do you think he can win, or what would you peg his chances versus Biden?
I can't, I'm not going to give a percentage, right. but I do think there's absolutely a chance that he could seize power again.
Just because Biden looks so old.
I don't actually buy into that. I think Biden is not the president I would want.
I'm just saying the perception, whether it's scary.
It's weird how well the media has warped this perception. And he is old, right? He's an octogenarian, and I am not a big Biden fan. As anyone who follows me on,
I'm just saying, like, the way he walks, you know what I mean?
Well, I think there's a perception, right? Trump's not much younger than him. That I think is the least effective argument for either of these guys. I think the issues with Biden, especially for people, our age, younger, are really important issues, and ones that honestly, like, it's absurd that he hasn't followed up on. That's a danger to him. He's going to need all hands on deck to win an election against Trump, I have a feeling. And alienating kids is not going to be helpful. With that being said, Trump is a guy who I don't think anyone should underestimate the machinery behind it right now. And he's proven willing, he's more than willing to go as hard as he needs to do what he wants. And I think that's the thing that just keeps sitting in the back of my mind, is not that we're going to get another January 6th, because I don't think we're going to get one of those, but more that this is just such a radicalizing moment for so many people on the right that we're just going to be dealing with an outflow from him, even just doing what he's done so far, insofar as the election interference case in Georgia. Like, he's turning up the gas fast, and I don't, the best forecast for the politics is that it gets very scary, I think, and there's a chance that he does win, legally even. I think there's a chance that he tries to steal it a second time. I think everything's on the table is what I'm trying to say.
You wrote about one of I consider top 3 creepiest people in America in one of your other articles, and I forgot to bring him up. I call him Redbeard, Charles Johnson.
Oh, Chuck. Oh, Chuck.
There's few, I don't even know what to say, but he just gives me the creeps.
I mean, he's, again, he is a true spooky guy. And, you know, he's a dangerous guy because he's very adept at manipulating people online into believing really, really outlandish things about himself and others in an effort to both rehab himself, but also spread, you know, the same kind of new right, white nationalist, extremist material. And yeah, Chuck's a scary guy.
Karl, have I told you about? I was in a Twitter space. I was listening to a Twitter space he was doing, and he literally said the first memo that President Biden read in the Oval Office was his memo.
Was Chuck's?
Yeah, he said, "Yep."
I mean, that doesn't shock me, right? Like that. This is the, you know, I spoke about last time we talked, and then I've written, you know, the last couple pieces I put up are about this infrastructure building, right? And part of the infrastructure of the new right is stuff like Chuck Johnson being the guy to write memos, if that's true.
No, that's not true. I'm sure he's like
He's a serial
liar.
He's a serial liar.
He's
Yeah,
pathological.
but that's what I'm saying. Like it's all about the thing, though. It's that perception, right? And that's why the lie is important to a guy like Chuck, because if people believe that that's the truth, that's where it's the feeling, it's the truthiness, it's the whatever we want to call it. Like that is the new right, and that's why Chuck is dangerous, right? Like is because of things like that, and then also the infrastructure building they have done, where they have been in the White House with guys like Trump and others doing exactly that. First memos, different memos. You know, I mean, it's all the ruse, the lie, the whatever, the fear mongering, however you want to put that, is all part of the same thing as the actual memo, right? Like they're all the same power to these people.
It's all Charles Johnson. He really illustrates your point that we discussed last time about these right-wing creeps in connected to all this tech money. He's very close friends with Palmer Luckey, the guy who did Oculus, the VR company that Facebook
and built the one-off killer VR headset. That one.
Yeah, and now he has a defense contractor firm called Andrill or something, and they get tons of Pentagon money. And the guy's hanging out with this, you know, crazy anti-Semite Charles Johnson, Matt Gaetz. We have a tech creep problem. You know what's amazing?
The techno-fascist creep is happening in real time. If you look.
It's a creep, and they're creepy too.
Yes. In fact, it works both ways. It's kind of nice how that works.
It's very sad to me that people were talking about defund the police and all that, which is fine, but that we couldn't even get the police departments to stop using the AI company that Charles Johnson co-owns.
Well, I mean, that's just it, though, right? Like, this is the infrastructure building, again, of the new right, is that kind of integration. Clearview. Yeah, it's that kind of integration, though, right? It's the merger of tech and the state repression, state violence, right? So, like, it's all these different things that, like, they start merging together, and that's, like, ultimately part of the goal, right? Like, is not just to shift the Overton window, not just to shift politics, but to become too big to fail as an ideology because it's integrated into the systems that are already in place within our society. And that's the part for me that, like, Clearview, Palantir, all these different companies that, you know, rightly so have been called out for years, whether they're Thiel's, whether they're, you know, whoever's that we understand as part of this Clearview. They're just, it's being integrated into every level of our society, right? Like SpaceX, you know, as has been reported this week, and Musk, you know, they have pretty much more power to do certain things than the U.S. military. So the military defers to them. You know, we're seeing it again with social media, where now, because Musk has radicalization and recruitment machine and a terror machine for these people, that, you know, they're Meta and Instagram and all these other platforms are going to stop moderating conspiracy theories and misinformation. Like, this is, when people talk about, myself included, like tech accelerationism, this is it, right? Like, this is the integration with co-option and dismantling of like critical parts of not just government, but how we understand society.
What's the deal with the stupid thing they're all putting in their Twitter names? The E/AC.
E/ACC.
What does that mean?
That is an accelerationist. That's, this is
But what's
that
the E? What's the E?
that would be effective accelerationism, right? So
Oh, they're calling effective ultra.
so like this is literally Nick Land, the Dark Enlightenment, the neo-reactionary guys I talked about last time. This is that at full speed. And like when their stated thing is capitalism can be viewed as a form of intelligence that optimizes resources allocation in a competitive environment, EACC advocates for embracing and accelerating the natural dynamism of the universe rather than attempting to slow it down or control it. That is, techno babble for we're gonna disrupt everything. And that's, I think last week when we talked, I talked about how the neo-reactionary idea was to sharpen capitalism to a fascist point. Well, EACC is that very, very thinly veiled behind this techno babble, VC babble.
How can it be bad if the likes of Martin Shkreli are behind it? When you have such moral leaders.
Yes, such moral. Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, it's every one of the worst people you can think of that from the last few years in tech. I am sure you can find them in one of the spheres of this, the EACC side, the terrestrial side. These are the ones that are coming to the fact they're coming to light publicly. Like, in itself says that there's already been an acceleration that's pretty profound, and that's scary as hell.
What's the deal with these guys? What should I call the Nick Land people? What's a good?
I mean, those are neo-reaction.
What's the deal with them all or a lot of them ending up in China? Like, so Nick Land lives in China now?
Well, yeah. So that's actually, a good question. I don't have a great answer for it, actually.
I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I mean, but aren't there some others?
I think it's partially there. There's because there's this monarchist element, right, to the neo-reactionary movement, and by element I mean it's a huge part of their thinking. But because of that, there is a weird fixation with city-states, and it's racist.
Singapore.
And I was going to say, but it's this weird racist. It's the fusion of these weird racist ideals around, and then fusing it into some bizarre form of monarchism, right? And so I would assume, that has something to do with this. I can't say for sure. I just don't know enough about, why. But I would not hesitate to hazard that as a guess.
So let me just do some mapping on my own. So in this neo-reactionary group, it's Nick Land, and tell me if I'm wrong, I probably am. It's Curtis Yarvin, and then it's also the Bronze Age pervert.
Well, you have like Boston, and you have like Nick Bostrom and these guys, Land, all these guys, right? Yeah.
But is BAP or what?
Yeah, I mean, I would put him in that camp, right? Like, I think you could definitely put him in that camp. Yeah. Somewhere, I mean, it's hard again to pin some of these people down just because, like, they do have kind of the Venn diagram of ideologies and different beliefs that they have publicly stated at different times. But like a lot of this, there's so much where it looks and sounds similar, but because of a niche feature that one doesn't have, it's not the same thing, if that makes sense. It's more what they, you know, a lot of these movements don't have that shows how they're different than what they do have. And I think all of these guys have interlocking, you know, they're interlocking views that make it appear, you know, that they may hold 3 or 4 views at once, not contradictory necessarily, but you know, from different places in their, you know, in the thinking. But yeah, BAP I would put in that camp.
Yeah, I don't even understand BAP. I'm just too lazy. I mean, all I remember is the
That's
guy.
been, I mean, you're doing it the right way. I, you know, I know cursory stuff about BAP purely because of just, you know, when you're watching and kind of waiting around, that account shows up.
All I know is he posted pictures of like bodybuilders, and then he would post like tweets that would be like, the Ivorian twins are developing a hegemonic rule.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm like, what the hell am I reading? What is this?
I mean, you know, some of this stuff is there's a level of D&D to the new right and to the neo-reactionary side that just is so cringy and just terrible, where it's like that kind of thing. And that's why, you know, in a lot of cases I just I do a lot of this, you know, the research I have reading, you know, like I have tons of books and articles and different news sources that I check. Twitter generally is the place I go to look, stare, and then realize I need bleach for everything my computer's touched, because I was dealing with these people. You know, so it's hard, you know, BAP is important, but also it's not, it's part of the larger influence network for these people.
So who's I'm going to ask you the tough questions now. I'm going to challenge you. So who's more influential? And this is a neutral question. It's not about who's.
Oh yeah, no.
It's not about who's good or bad. It's about, is it the Groypers or the neo-reactionaries?
Jesus Christ. Well, I think the neo-reactionaries for sure are more powerful because they are guys who have multiple billions in venture capital, right?
Like, so Peter Thiel. So who are the billionaires that you feel confident are part of it? So Peter Thiel.
Oh, Thiel for sure.
Okay.
Mark Andreessen for sure.
Okay.
Because, you know, he's out there with his BS. And then, I mean, there are a lot of people that, you know, I think we could put Musk in that camp pretty clearly now. He definitely is clicking all of the boxes, and I actually have been really, the last couple days, I have a sneaking suspicion that what we're seeing from Musk and what we're seeing from Vivek Ramaswamy is a window into what American Republican and right-wing politics will look like for the 2028 cycle. Because it's going to be someone like Vivek, who's got the McKinsey energy and is a radical new writer, as he is. You know, it came out today, I believe, it's today, that, you know, Vivek is a fan of Hanina's, and
Oh yeah, they did a podcast together. And
they've read a ton of each other. You know, there's a whole bunch of play here. So I think, you know, Musk for sure. Like I said, we could, I think, very easily put him in that camp now, along with, like I said, Mark Andreessen, you know, Thiel. There are definitely some others that definitely aren't as influential.
And let me just do devil's advocate. So, like, some of these I mean, maybe you're totally right, but some of these E/ACC, whatever, the guys on Twitter, I presume they would say this is just about AI and like AI, this debate about AI safety and doomerism and
and I was gonna say, I mean, this all grows out of, yeah. Sorry,
they would say it has nothing to do with, you know, democracy or monarchy or any of that, you know, dark enlightenment stuff.
Well, and I think it's the same way that if you ask in 2015, if you had asked Richard Spencer if he was an admirer of fascism,
Right.
he would have lied through his teeth. I think there's a similar thing going on here, because when you really do look at what these groups and philosophical kind of conversations they're trying to have are implying, these at their heart are white supremacist, eugenics, just deeply scientific racist. It's the worst kind of applications of technology imaginable. And with the long termers as an example, like you telling me that a future potential life is more important than 100 million or a billion lives now because of climate change, and then your second comment on that statement is we also have to have more kids so we can repopulate the planet. We're starting to get into a world that is only known, those are deeply problematic and fascist aligned, Nazi aligned, white supremacist aligned ideologies, right? So like I think it's hard to make the claim, if you're one of these people, to say, oh well, it's not about that, when it's like it clearly is, because your spokespeople have said as much. It might be cloaked in the same kind of techno speak that you've tried to like use and have used effectively to manipulate business and society for the last 20 years. But on this one, it seems not to be working.
So just for the audience,
Yeah.
What are the main bullet points? If there's like 2 or 3 bullet points of Yarvin, what are they?
Similar to Nick Land, right? Okay, the big difference I would say, and this is the difference, right, is Curtis Yarvin has gone on to kind of thrive in Silicon Valley, whereas, like you said, Land, is out. But like Moldbug, his alias online, was really influential in a way that even Nick Land stuff in some ways wasn't. But like Yarvin, I think the other point I would make is he is incredibly open about wanting to end democracy. He is as open as you can be, and he is a huge, this is someone that Blake Masters has cited, JD Vance cites. He's incredibly influential in the new Republican and new American right. And like that was, I think that was in 2021 when JD Vance, was kind of linked openly. But
what did they want to replace it with? A monarch? Like how is this for real? Like,
well, he thinks that a Napoleon or a Lenin should seize quote absolute power.
A Napoleon or a Lenin. So he doesn't even care what the ideology.
These people, that's what I think needs to be impressed upon people. This is hollow as hell, beyond wanting the absolute power of the monarchy and the hierarchy and that structure and that rigidity and that absolute power.
He doesn't care if it's a communist leader.
He it appears not, from what he's said, right? And you have to understand, like, his entire goal stated is absolute power. And his view is he and the others in his that think his way have to do everything in their power to make that happen. And centralizing power like this, he's a monarchist. And he's dead serious about it. And these guys are getting bigger and bigger, and they're getting more and more gravity around them. They're gaining mass, and it's what these are the ideologies that float with the more white nationalist ones, right, in the kind of milieu of the new American right. And that's the real, this is that we're getting right into the core of the thing.
Does he propose like practical? Does he like say like, I'm hoping that Senator Vance will put forward the monarchy bill in 2030 or something? Or is it theoretical?
No, it's accelerationist, right? Like his goal is to ready the field so they can seize absolute power. That's his goal. That is his stated goal, right? Like, is to create conditions in which he and his friends in the new right can collapse democracy and seize power. That is their stated goal, right? Like they say monarchist and all of this, they're saying under one leader, they're calling for a dictatorship. And I mean, they're talking about the dictatorship of capital, right? A businessman at the top, essentially, and the whole thing run as a corporation where the people are ground to dust. As capitalism is, quote, sharpened to a fascist point.
In 2002, Yarvin founded how do you say this? Urbit computer
Urbit, yep.
as a decentralized network of personal servers. In 2013, he's still working on it? Wait, does anybody use this thing? Is this a real thing or what is going on?
Well, he's in all these little pies, like all of them. He's got fingers in everything from AI to decentralization to just fingers in everything. And like, Yarvin, these guys are the Dark Enlightenment, and they call themselves that, right? Like they know what they are. They're a counter enlightenment, and that's what they want to be, right? So like that's how you have to look at their politics. And you've got stuff like you've got magazines and different things running huge exposés on this guy, and they'll either kind of gliss over the fact that he's a staunch uber right-wing monarchist, and he's a philosopher, he has these weird ideas, and it's like he thinks of his ideas as as a way to like poison the world in a certain way. When you read some of his writing, like he wants to spread his ideas, so it's scary seeing all of this happening kind of at the same time, understanding that their goals are all interlinked. They might not have the same view of why in like the ethno-nationalist sense or in a religious sense, but they all have them, the Christian right, all these different groups have overlapping goals of ending the American democracy we understand and replacing it with something far, far worse. And so that's where, you start to see causal chains from someone like Yarvin, and you see where that starts to bleed into circles that were maybe much more Christian, millennial apocalyptic instead. So they've started to all, stuff starting to kind of pollinate in really heavy ways because these guys are getting out further and further. And so like Yarvin, my point would be just don't listen to a guy.
I'm looking at his Wikipedia right now, and it says investor. I can't say this guy's name. Balaji Srinivasan has also echoed Yarvin's ideas of techno corporate. And is this a real wordism? Chimeralism.
Yes. Yeah. Chimeralism. Yes. So like that's that by so unicameral, bicameral, right? So like a unicameral, this is all talking about hierarchy, right? And the way that and like the hierarchy of society should function. And
yeah, it says he advocated in a 2013 speech a society, quote, society run by Silicon Valley, an opt-in society ultimately outside the US run by technology. Yeah, this reminds me of that whole seasteading thing, which they
this is seasteading for the internet, but the worst part is this is actually caught on, and that seasteading has actually turned into a digital nation state, right? But this authoritarian as hell, extremely hard right, monarchist digital nation state, and it's starting to look for physical real estate. And that's the danger, right? Like we're looking at a digital movement that's decentralized, believes in monarchical single party rule and fanatical use of technology to both maintain and end life, like to quote optimize the world system, end quote, right? Like that these people, I call it techno-fascism for a reason, and I've faced some flack for that, but like That's the easier way to understand this, right? Like we are deep into an ideological swamp, but like this is the future of the movement, and it's got some bucks and power.
Do they have a sci-fi novel that they love, sort of like Ayn Rand's like Atlas Shrugged? I haven't read Snow Crash yet, but this seems like a movement where like,
well, like Nick Land, all these guys came out of the cybernetic research unit at Warwick, and like that's a philosophy department in their own little club, right? And yeah, I mean, there's something to it.
Yarvin's not. He's not a Nazi, right? He's some kind of fascist, right?
These guys, they say they're monarchists and neo-reactionaries. I take them at their word, but I also, the way that I understand fascism, right, and the way that fascism functions, it sounds and looks and feels identical to this idea of neo-reaction or monarchism, or that. When someone tries to tell me that, well, our only goal is to
end
democracy for a hyper-capitalist authoritarian right-wing state, in my mind, we know of a couple of those historically, and one of them murdered hundreds of millions of people and exterminated people in camps, and one ended with their leader being hung by the population.
Yeah, I'm not saying he's good or he isn't a fascist.
No,
I'm just saying
he's
not like I think he's ethnically Jewish. He's not.
They're not saying they're not these. They're not. Okay. They are not going to be swastika toting.
Okay.
This is the button down, right? Like this
they're
is
fancy.
Or they're just like, I'm going to wear my t-shirt, my flip flops, and my black jeans, and we're going to talk about rationalist reasoning behind why we should allow people to die now to secure a better future for our hypothetical progeny. And that's just repackaged fucking 14 words propaganda, and that's where it's at.
Did you read Fire and Fury by Michael Wolff by any chance?
I did not.
Okay. I thought it was the best Trump book. It was very easy to read, but basically like half of the book is just Bannon at these dinner parties just like spilling the beans.
Telling the world what they plan to do.
Well, but the way he talks about Peter Thiel, he says Peter Thiel like showed up to Trump Tower with his army of right-wing twinks or something. And I'm not saying that this is not about his sexuality at all, but it seems like the guy just collects. Like if you're like a young right-winger and you have the fortune of like running into him and he likes you, like he'll just make people for life,
well, I think that's a billionaire thing in a certain way,
but he excels at that.
Thiel, all of these people, right, are at some level, and this is again just an outward appearances thing, just kind of accruers, right? Like they like accruing things. They like holding on to stuff. They like having things, having either the power those things represent, the power they hold, the power over a person. That just seems to be a running theme, right? Like that seems to be the thing with him specifically. But I think similarly with Musk, we see it in his really bizarre fan interactions.
But Musk, so like Peter Thiel collects like Blake Masters and
right, exactly, yeah,
and Vance,
Musk is out here
Cat Turd,
exactly, Cat Turd too.
Ian Miles Chong,
and God, what that terrible person. Ian has had me blocked for 3 years. 3 years. And every once in a while, someone will send me a screen cap. Like, he just reshared that tweet from 3 years ago. And it's just like, man, to have that much free time.
So let's end on a broad question.
Shoot.
What do you think the conventional wisdom is getting wrong or doesn't understand? We talked last time about, we both agreed that the people, the journalists, they don't really get how much more extreme Gen Z right is. And a good example is Nate Hochman and Richard Hanania, because Hanania, however you say his name, he had enough like shame, I guess, to like do it under a fake name. Hogan did it in public, like with his The question is, what is the conventional wisdom getting wrong in your opinion? It could be anything.
I mean, I think generally the conventional wisdom, I think, is getting wrong a couple things that kind of fold into each other. And they are that, like, that Trump is going to just kind of, not just Trump, but Trump and the movement, right? Like the MAGA movement, are just going to disappear if he somehow goes to jail, which I just don't know the logistics of putting a president in jail. I'm not saying like that they won't. I don't know how you actually physically put a president in a prison. That's one thing. But that movement isn't going anywhere. If anything, it's getting more radical. It's getting more able to infiltrate larger swaths of our social fabric, which is a huge problem, especially at the school board and library board and kind of that level of grassroots interaction. But more broadly than just MAGA, like more broadly, the new right is continuing to accelerate and push new goals that we're seeing all the time. The hysteria around AI, all these different things, these are being driven by these same groups of people and individuals. So, I think the takeaways I would fold together are that Trump and that are not going anywhere for the foreseeable future. And the broader new right, the American new right, is really, I mean, it's starting to gain some real mass.
Yeah, I mean, do you think, one question I've asked guests before is, the problem with what me and you do a lot is there's not great polling, right? I mean, like, you can't, it's obviously it's hard to like call people up and be like, are you racist? Are you anti-Semitic? Are you homophobic? Like, people lie. So
and they lie on basic polling now. So, and the polling is outrageously bad now. So
I become interested in this idea of proxy polling, basically tricking people into sort of telling. And one idea, I've talked with somebody at a think tank about potentially doing it, is just to do a generic American history poll. And so like the first like 8 out of 10 questions are like totally fake. I mean, just a ruse to get the person convinced that they can let their guard down. But you make like the 7th question, and you just ask Gen Z Republicans in a poll, and you make the 7th question: should America have entered World War II? And like,
no, I think this is the thing though. Like, I think proxy polling and stuff like what you're describing, that might be a better way to get the pulse. And I think actually you could do that pretty effectively, especially if you understand how to target like advertising or promotions to certain age groups, because that's what just we're missing something in the political sphere publicly, and it might be an intentional missing of the point, because that requires nuance, that requires more depth, that requires more reporters, that requires more money. I can't say which one it is. It sure feels like there's an intentional push to not maybe go as in depth on some of this exact thing, that kind of polling. But I would be really interested to see what those numbers reflect, because the Gen Z population of online Republicans is, I mean, those are scary extremist visions that these kids have.
I know, and this is the difficulty, and I'm sure you've thought about this. And if you have any ideas on what you would poll if you could, that population, but like people always will say to people like us, like, oh, that's just a few people on the internet. Oh, it's just a few, which I think is a stupid argument because, like, the number, any influential political group is always a small minority, right?
Well, I mean, it's it's like saying you don't have a temperature without taking your thermometer,
Yeah.
or you not taking your temperature without a thermometer, just assuming, right? And then going from that to not do other things that you might need to, and like it's really tough, right? Because I think there is a lot of self-denial in this country, and that we've all seen over the last number of years since Trump was elected, that like, and before that, this country has some huge systemic issues that are feeding the populist, hard, extremely hard right, fascist view that a lot of these kids hold. And that's the issue, right? Like, these are all interconnected issues, and the big ones are our history, right? Like, we ourselves have to address our history. We have to address the stories we've told ourselves and the myths we've built, and really have the hard, huge conversation that has to be had to really neuter what this next generation of Republicans is.
Yeah, I mean, I understand it. People don't want to look at these, Nazis because
No.
it's disgusting. But they're in for rude awakening, and I really hope we get follow-up reporting on the Gen Z congressional staffers.
That one I do
gotta-
too. No, we have to, because we have to know what's going on here, and there's enough smoke in the research circles and with the reporting we've already had that, like, there's a big fire somewhere inside of that.
Karl,
story.
if I was in DC, I would have already broken the story. It's like I told you, you just go there. It's literally all you have to do is wait for the Wade Searle, the Nazi staffer, to go to lunch. See who he's going to lunch with.
Yeah.
He knows there's like 30 groypers there. They all know each other. I guarantee. Yeah, but this polling thing, we need something. We need some kind of data, because obviously, like, the traditional polling, like, are you racist? It's just useless. So we're gonna need to. And I'd love to hear any ideas you come up with. It's something we need that needs to be done, I think.
Yeah, people. I mean, it's something that definitely needs to be thought through, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, this Yarvinga, this whole movement, it is sort of beyond belief. It's so
One of
crazy.
the ones.
Yeah.
For a long time, like, I do a lot of kind of fact checking stuff, and for a long time I kind of had set aside some of the connections because it just sounded too crazy, and then you start reading and it's like, oh, there are 10 articles from 4 different really well respected news outlets that are all saying the same thing. Oh no. And it's so it does, but this is one of the biggest, this is going to be one of the bigger changes in how we have to understand politics, I think, that's happened in the last probably 50 years.
Yep, it's the rich nerd fascism. Yep.
Revenge of the Nerds was a threat, I think.
You can read Karl Folk's essays at instituteofunreality.com.